So in this segment, we're going to be talking about children in care homes are being illegally placed in caravans and boats. And this is a story I kind of alluded to in a community post I did a few days ago now. And it's just so bizarre to me. Like, we create a system where kids, vulnerable children, are kept in on boats and caravans because the government doesn't want to pay, doesn't want to sort out the situation with kids in care. That's what this is. The government of just this is what it looks like. This is what a broken society looks like. This is what it looks like when a government is so dogmatic to break the social structures of this country, break the welfare system, that they'll happily put out, they'll happily sell out kids, happily sell them out. Who cares about them? They're vulnerable kids. Their parents, maybe they're not fit and able. Maybe their parents have passed away. We don't know, but the situation is that you're raising a lot of children here who have grown up in a really, really damaging way, and the simple fact is it's just not good for them. It's just not good for them. What kind of life are they going to live? A lot of them. A lot of them will turn out okay. Some of them won't, and it'll be down to a really bad upbringing. That will be a key cause of it. So children in care are still being illegally kept in unregulated homes, in narrow boats and caravans. The BBC found a 12-year-old boy who was placed on a campsite for weeks, more than 100 miles from his siblings and school. Like, why the hell has this happened? It's mostly down to the cuts to councils. This is where the councils have cut the money, essentially, because after austerity you had massive council cuts, thanks Dave. And so what that means is that councils had to look to get money from somewhere. So they cut children's services because kids can't vote. So they cut their services. Such placements were banned for under 16s, but there were exemptions for holidays that were being exploited now. Why is this boy being kept on a campsite 100 miles away from his siblings and his school? How is he supposed to get an education? You could argue maybe it's during the holiday, but still, this should not be the case. The Department for Education says it's Ofsted's job to prosecute companies, but we read at the bottom of the article, which for some reason the BBC put it there, that Ofsted are claiming the government haven't given them the powers to deal with this situation that's going on here. Now, who do you believe in this situation? The British government, the Tory government, or do you believe Ofsted? I know which one I believe. Local authorities are breaking the law by placing children under the age of 16 in unregulated homes. It is also illegal for companies to run unregistered children's homes. All sorts of abuse could be happening in those sorts of places. Although there are exemptions allowing firms to run placements that are not regulated, such as for holidays and leisure activities, but that system is evidently being abused. And why should children be kept in unregistered children's homes? It makes no sense. The BBC found at least 120 children, including one child aged 10, who had been placed in unregulated homes. And again, anything can happen to these kids. Ofsted says they are not meant to allow children to be moved between temporary placements, where there is no law or guidance defining these activities. So what you could have is a situation where kids are just moved from temporary placement to temporary placement, because it's safe. For example, if a placement can only be for 6 weeks, if it's temporary, after 6 weeks are up, they can move them to another place for 6 weeks. It's just ridiculous. A 14-year-old boy was placed in this unregulated placement above a shop in Portsmouth. I mean, come on. It's wild. The 12-year-old boy was recently placed in the unregulated care for at least 6 weeks with a company that moves children between its narrowboats and its caravans. So evidently it's happening. They're just moving them from temporary accommodation to temporary accommodation. Despite being under the care of Worcestershire County Council, he was placed in a caravan on a campsite in Lancashire, more than 100 miles away from his school and his siblings. I mean, the councils, I get they've had their funding stripped, but this is wild. This is absolutely wild, and I don't know who the blame goes with. It has to go to central government here for the funding cuts, but these councils decided that they're going to cut children's services. The boy has been moved between a number of children's homes before his most recent home was closed at short notice for staffing reasons, so they can't even get staff to run these places. He was then moved into a caravan by Bear Care Services. In contrast, his brother has been in a stable foster placement for years, and so this is just a lottery system at this point. That one of these kids was lucky, was put hopefully it's a stable foster home, but the other one he's been moved around because there's no place for him. When contacted by the BBC, the company said the placement was needed because of a massive shortage of registered provisions. So again, the company is saying that there's not any registered places. This is the only option we have. He said it was operating lawfully because placements in mobile homes such as caravans and narrowboats do not need to be registered. So effectively, they're just using loopholes to get away with this stuff. However, Worcestershire Council did not deny it was breaking the law in placing the children in unregulated settings. It described the accommodation as a crisis placement. So you've got councils here saying, look, we don't have a choice but to put them in these places. So again, yeah, who's the onus on here? The BBC has also learned another case where a 14-year-old known to be at risk of jumping out of windows was placed without safeguards in an unregulated home above a shop. I'm guessing that's the one they referenced earlier in Portsmouth. I mean, what happens if this kid manages to jump out a window? Who's responsible at that point? The home's unregistered. Who's responsible there? In total, the BBC received responses from 141 authorities in England to freedom of information requests. More than 50 of these councils admit to placing at least 120 children in unregulated homes. That's wild. And some of them, some of the councils didn't even return the request for the information request. Many refused to provide the real number of children placed in unregulated homes because they said the data was personal information of the child. But the thing is, they're not offering you specifics. They're not giving you the child's name. So this argument to me is bogus. Some placements include restrictions on the movement and freedoms of children of their own welfare. And again, I think that's bogus because what you're offering for is just broad data. You're not asking for specifics here. Catherine Sachs-Jones, chief executive of Become, a charity for children in care, said the situation was a national scandal, and I 100% agree with her. It is a national scandal. You've got vulnerable children here who've been taken into care, who can't be looked after by the system, by the state. Caroline Willow, director of the children's charity Article 39, said a young child moved from caravan to caravan defies the understanding of what a holiday is, and that's true that they're using this holiday exemption as a loophole to get around putting them in permanent placement. The government needs to amend the legislation to make it absolutely clear what constitutes holiday accommodation for children in care, which I agree with. The government has to offer something here, has to say what it is. In 2019, the BBC revealed that an 11-year-old had been placed in an unregulated care home and found that older children faced organised abuse in the homes. So you have what's clearly a system of whoever this is, staff or other kids abusing kids, right? And you have an 11-year-old put into those care homes. Who is dealing with this stuff? Who's making these placement decisions? When the government announced its ban, the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williams, said the BBC highlighting something that just needed to be changed. You had 10 years, bro. I know Williamson isn't in the government anymore. His government had a long time to fix it, especially since these are the guys that broke the system. But while placing under 16s in an unregulated home is now unlawful, no legal action has been taken against the council. The Department for Education declined to answer whether it had failed to properly legislate against the use of unregulated placements. So they asked the Department of Education directly, did you fail in this regard? And they didn't answer. That's shambolic. It should go through select committees. At this point, whoever the relevant select committee is should be questioning this stuff. In a statement, it said Ofsted can prosecute providers operating as children's homes without the required registration, and it holds local councils to account for the quality of care for children. But the BBC learned that Ofsted has not brought any prosecutions against companies running an unregistered children's home. Ofsted says it has not been given the additional powers it was promised, such as the ability to fine providers directly. It said local authorities face significant challenges in finding the right home. So what you have is a system where central government, the Tories, cut a lot of money to councils, right? Councils had to figure out how to balance the books. So what they did was they cut services. But what they did, especially, at least some of these councils, is they cut children's services. Why? Children can't vote, like I said. And that's where you lead in a system where kids are being put into broken homes, being bullied, abused, put on caravans and narrowboats, because no one's regulating this stuff. And at the end of the day, the people who take on these children are often paid for it. So there's a financial incentive to take these children and just put them anywhere because you're going to make money out of it. It's genuinely a wild system, and Ofsted have to do something. And this is something the Labour Party should be talking about as well. What the hell is going on here? Genuinely, the fact is the BBC have covered this more than once, and the MPs, the relevant politicians, haven't done anything to fix this. Councils don't talk enough about the fact that their budgets were cut, because I don't think they want to annoy the government, because then the government will give them even less money. But councils have to stand up for themselves here, because at the end of the day, they're failing their constituents. The government are failing the constituents. The people of this country, at the end of the day. I don't know what will end up, how these children end up, but the more kind of broken they end up, the worse it becomes long term for this country. And it's just such a stupid thing for the government to do. The way that they've cut this, they've cut services, it's just shambolic. Absolutely abhorrent from a bunch of people, and that's why the people who implemented austerity on this country should never be forgiven. Regardless of what they say now, whatever their positions are on certain policies, people shouldn't be supporting them, retweeting them, etc. There are better people who make the same points, honestly, because the ones who implemented austerity on this country broke this country. They broke it. They create a system where kids don't have stable homes to live in. Kids in care don't have stable homes to live in, are being pushed from narrow boats to caravans. Extremely just dangerous and unsafe. It's just madness, honestly. Something needs to be done about this, and this government aren't going to do anything. The Tories won't do anything about this. Labour have to offer something on this, genuinely. They have to do something about this, because this is awful. Absolutely awful. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.